if you take a look at the most important expenditure this country has made, it's the commitment to buy the F-35. Now, this is a pet peeve of mine because the F-35 is the most expensive military acquisition in our history. The Harper government is infamous for not sharing information or giving good information. And this is the best example, in fact, that I can offer you tonight. You will recall that the Parliamentary Budget Officer asked for the full life cycle price for the F-35. And that meant the cost of acquisition, maintenance, and operation. The government gave him a figure of $14.7 billion for 65 aircraft. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer took a look at the number and just said that number is completely erroneous and misleading and way too low. So to cut to the chase, KPMG, the auditing firm, was brought in to take a look at the real number. And the real number was $45 billion.
Oh my God.
$45 billion. Now, what makes it even worse is that the government was asked specifically to give the full life cycle of the acquisition and did not give the information. And there's only one reason they would do that. They didn't want you to know the sticker price. And so they purposely withheld information to make it look much cheaper than it was. And to make it even crazier, this was an airplane that we had committed to that went into production before it went into testing. And just start thinking about what that means and what that does to the costs. And Lockheed Martin got away with the spurious argument that testing would be too expensive. So let's buy into it, and before we produce it, we'll tell you what it's going to be like. And we're in this ridiculous position of the most expensive acquisition in our history. We don't know how much it costs. And we're finding out it doesn't work very well. In fact, the last person I talked to in Washington who is an expert in these things said it's like a flying piano. Doesn't give us much hope. Now, Peter Milliken. Peter Milliken is a longtime Speaker of the House of Commons, a special position because the Speaker of the House of Commons is elected by all the MPs, not just by one party. Very popular man, very judicious man. Peter Milliken said this, longtime Speaker of the House of Commons, "Parliament can hardly be weakened any more than it already is. MPs are supposed to be free to speak on behalf of constituents, and parties are supposed to have diverse views within them. Stephen Harper does not encourage that conversation." And that's a very important observation from someone who is the referee amongst all the parties and is a diplomat by nature, and also a practical man. And if you're looking for an absurdity to end all absurdities, you couldn't get a better example than a government which keeps on telling us, no, we're not against releasing information, we're open and transparent. And then they muzzle their own MPs. They don't let them stand up and make a statement before question period. And the Speaker of the House of Commons has to make a ruling to allow an MP to stand up and say something on behalf of his own constituents. Now, this last fellow is a sad story. His name is Munir Sheikh. You probably remember him as the chief statistician for Stats Canada, which is an outstanding department of government. The fact that we had a person of this quality, a person who was known not to be influenced, when he stood behind something, he did not back off because of political pressure. That's why he got the job initially. He was known for his professionalism and his toughness and his fairness, but he wouldn't be bullied. Well, he got bullied because it ended up that he got tied in with Tony Clement. And he gave me an interview for the book with respect to how we lost the long-form census. And I'm going to tell you that story in a very abbreviated fashion. The long-form census was seen as an impediment by the Conservatives to winning majority government. They thought that there would be a political advantage if they could have a voluntary short-form census. The professional staff in the Department of Stats Canada, which is an extremely proud group of people and very gifted people, these are guys who have to certify the numbers. They could not believe that the government was going this route. But the government was not open about how it proceeded. instead of saying, we are going to change it, they said, the department has recommended that we go to a voluntary short-form census. In fact, and in truth, Munir Sheikh had signed the documents for the long-form census, and the PMO rejected it, because the PMO is where everything gets decided these days. But here's the interesting thing. Again, onto the issue of financial prudence. When we moved from the long-form census, we took away yet another independent source of information. If you run your government by ideology, you want to make sure you get rid of all the independent thinking people. That's why this government has such a hard time with scientists, why it likes to muzzle people, because it gets in the way of the agenda. And the best example of that is the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy was destroyed, and in a weak moment where he actually lapsed into the truth, John Baird said, we just don't like the advice they give us. Scientists are truth and fact seekers. They don't tell you the spin. You provide the spin as the politician, but here's John Baird. We don't like what they're telling us. And I know what they didn't like to hear. They didn't like to hear from people like David Schindler, world-class scientist out of the Experimental Lakes area, the guy who was responsible for the fact that we got an acid rain treaty with the United States because they had a president who said, who has seen acid rain? These are the people that came up with the scientific evidence in those whole lake experimental areas. They also were the people who documented the destructive force of phosphorus going into fresh water. This is a world-class operation. And sadly, from the government's point of view, would have put some natural constraints on the tar sands development and the freshwater pollution from it. And that's why the ELA, in my opinion, was, it wasn't the savings of a piddling $2 million from a government that will spend, you know, $30 million resurrecting the War of 1812. Munir Sheikh came into my apartment for the interview. He sat on the Chesterfield before we started and he said, I didn't leave Pakistan because I had no money. I left Pakistan because of the way it's governed. And then I found it here. And this is one of the quotes he gave me. I can't trust this man being Tony Clement. I can't trust this government or this Prime Minister. Now, I'll give you a little bit of background, a little preview of why that's true. Munir Sheikh would not let the minister lie about it in public. Cut to the quick, that's what it came down to. And when he saw him doing that, he went to the clerk of the Privy Council and he said, the minister has said this about me publicly. I am facing a palace revolution inside StatsCan because everyone knows no statistician would ever recommend dropping the long-form census. It's the basis for sound policy. And that, of course, was one of the reasons the Conservatives wanted to get rid of the long-form census, because they don't want fact-driven policy. They want policy-driven facts. And anybody who steps in the way as an independent voice is downsized. And that's what happened to Munir Sheikh. Jeff Hutchings from our province, brilliant biologist at Dalhousie University, one of my key sources in Lament for an Ocean about the science that was done and suppressed and allowed the Great Northern cod stocks to be destroyed. He reacted when scientists were muzzled. Federal scientists were told when they did a paper, they couldn't talk about the paper, they couldn't give interviews, they couldn't even go to conventions without a government minder. The last time I saw government minders, they were in a North Korean bad videotape of some forced confession. I've never, ever heard in this country of someone having a minder. So Jeff Hutchings, when he found out that federal scientists could no longer speak to journalists, said, this is like an inquisition. Who did you speak to? What did you say? Sadly, the saddest thing about the Harper government is their choice, no, their absolute demand that they discourage access to knowledge. I can't think of anything that's more detrimental to a democracy than somebody who reduces access or prohibits people to have access to knowledge.